Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Letters to Tahira. Tahira K. Nam Khatud. By G. A. Parwez. Translated by Mrs. Suraya Alvi. Chapter 10-11. 10th Letter to Tahira. Our Modern Women. Dear Tahira, I am grieved, like you, over the consequence of Shahida's married life, but we have different reasons to be so. Your sadness stems from the fact that Shahida is your childhood friend with whom you shared good and bad times, and now it is painful to see her pathetic condition. Whereas what saddens me is that Shahida turned a deaf ear to what I had been telling her for so long. That eventually she had to face the expected result, made me shudder just thinking about. The difficulty in our society is that men generally are guilty of high-handedness, and the victimization of women is a general rule. I am hesitating to say that, and you may mind it, but the truth has to be spoken out. In a conflict between a man and a woman, other women will always side with the woman, and the man is, as always, considered the guilty party. If you consider Shahida's life and its consequences objectively, then I am sure you will agree with me that the outcome was in line with the positions taken. Saeed was not guilty. Rather, the patience, courage, and tolerance with which he bore everything is praiseworthy. Life of a modern wife. Shahida's lifestyle was such that she never woke up before 9 in the morning, because she never slept before midnight. If today she is at the club, yesterday it was a big meeting where she had to speak, and the next day would be the last show of the seminar. If there was no function outside the house, then she would invite her friends to dinner at home and they would gossip till midnight. Poor Saeed had to work in the office the whole day long. How could he keep awake till midnight? In the beginning he kept her company till late at night, but later he found he could not cope. Anyway, it was quite considerate of him that he never checked Shahida rudely or sternly. He tried to reason with her, but he was never harsh. She would return home at midnight, and he would get up to open the door for her. Their 2 little daughters had to go to school by 8 the next morning. Just think how much of a botheration it was for the father to wake the girls up and get them ready for school, while their mother was still sleeping. But Saeed used to do all that willingly. The dilemma was that the elder girl was neither big enough to look after herself, nor was she so small that her father could bathe her and get her dressed for school. Moreover, this job could not be left to the servants, and he had to employ a nanny for this purpose. Saeed knew that if the children were left completely to a nanny, it would affect their upbringing. Therefore, he looked after his 2 daughters himself. Along with this, he also had to be ready himself to reach his office by 9. All this was happening in-house while Shahida was asleep. She would wake up to find that her children and husband had left for school and office respectively. It would take her about an hour to get over the hangover of sleeping late. This is a normal result of regularly getting up late. Breakfast would be followed by going through a newspaper or a magazine. As she was the secretary of the Women's Association, she had to check all mail and documents related to it. Then she would write an article for the association's magazine, on how to bring up children and on having a happy home life. Soon it would be time for lunch. After lunch she would listen to the radio or gramophone records, and then have her afternoon siesta. If the children returned before their mother had her afternoon nap, they would say good morning to her. Otherwise, the servants would feed them and they would start playing. Then their tutor would come and they would become busy with studying. Mother would get up, have her bath and tea, and would then either go to the club to play badminton or table tennis or go out for shopping. Saeed would come home tired with work, and would then start looking after the kids, the servants, the household accounts and checking things in the house. Dinner, provided they were not dining out, would be at the family table, but here too, quite often, the conversation would become sour. Shahida was always complaining about uncouth servants, the unorganized house, the ill-mannered children and an inattentive husband. When Saeed used to so much as remark about how much interest she took in the home, things would get worse. Ill health. Well, Tahira, have I written anything wrong? If it is incorrect, then you are responsible, because you are my prime source for all this information. You also used to tell me how you tried your best to change her, but she always turned a deaf ear to all your suggestions. You also told me that this was not only the cause of her disorganized house life, but that it also was affecting her health. Not sleeping or eating on time, or regularly dining at hotels or clubs was taking its toll upon her health. At such places, the emphasis is mostly on clean crockery. Although nobody knows how they clean them. But nobody thinks of the food ingredients. As health worsened, it made her more jittery and consequently increased expenses. Increase of expenses. First, it was the many servants that increased the expenses. And many servants had to be employed because Shahida was too busy with her social engagements and her women's association to be able to attend to her home. And now it was doctors' fees and the driver's bill taking a toll. Income was limited to Saeed's salary only. How could that salary cope with these increasing expenses? If Shahida had cared, then she would have decreased her personal expenses and balanced her budget. But she did not reduce any of her expenses. Saeed had to borrow money, and that decreased his income all the more, because of the deduction to pay the installments on his debt. On top of this, Shahida demanded that she had to go to New York to participate in the All-World Women's Conference, as the secretary of her association. There she would listen to deliberations on human welfare in general, and women's rights and obligations in particular. The association did not have enough money, so she got a resolution passed that every delegate would pay for herself. It was impossible for Saeed to procure such a large amount, and whatever he had, was not concealed from Shahida. She knew about each and every penny of his income and expenses, as Saeed had never kept any secret from her. Tahira, so many times you said to me that Saeed really justifies his name. Saeed means good omen. And this step. Over and above all this, Shahida got annoyed and left with the children for her father's home, from where she filed a case for divorce. Now Tahira, you tell me how far her taking this step was justified? Granted, men are cruel, but does this story paint Saeed as bad? Poor women are generally the wronged against, but tell me, upon God, was Shahida the oppressed one? This is not just Shahida and Saeed's story. It is becoming quite prevalent in our society. Just as, time and again, some things become a fashion in different societies, in the same manner the slogan of women's rights is becoming a fashion in our society. At least, I do believe that you would not misunderstand my words, because you do know how depressing women's subjugation is to me, and how much of an advocate I am for women's rights. And why not when Quran itself is such a great proponent of them? Women's responsibilities. All I want to say is that every right is accompanied by a responsibility. Our ladies who are promoting women's rights are putting forth great demands, but they simply do not mention a single responsibility of their own. I am ready to fight for every right that has been given to women by the Quran, and which has been suppressed by men who use religious laws which were formulated during the reign of suppressive kings as shields. With all the force at my disposal. You know I have been fighting for this since long, but along with it I want to remind my daughters and sisters of all the responsibilities which they have to shoulder, as women. Being envious of a man. Whether you admit or not, Tahira, it is a fact that in our times, subconsciously, women have come to think that it is an utter disgrace to be a woman. This creates a conflict in their minds, which manifests itself in such slogans that women are equal to men. All the jobs which men can and will do, women can and will do too. On the surface these slogans sound so revolutionary and seem to raise the status of women. But my dear daughter, our sisters have yet to understand how much these demands and slogans are depressing their status. I quote the Quran, which said about the women of the era before Islam that in a dispute, she herself cannot explain her case explicitly. 43:18. This is exactly the position of these women in our times. They rise to fight their case without understanding what their strengths are and what their demands are. They want to safeguard their rights and demand the status of men. Remember Tahira, a woman has her own place in this world. If a woman wants to give up her position in exchange for a man's status, it is nothing to be proud of. This, on the contrary, makes men believe that they really do have a higher status, which in turn makes women clamor for and demand their rights. Duties of men and women. In nature's scheme of things there is no difference between the status of men and women. However, their duties are different. Their physical and biological differences reflect these duties. This difference, in fact, is the reason why a greater part of a woman's life is spent away from the practical realities of life. Consider, for example, the responsibility of pregnancy, childbirth, lactation, or nursing an infant. This handicap does not mean that she becomes lower in status to a man. Looking at it from this viewpoint, raises the woman's status even higher than that of a man. Despite these handicaps, a woman, if she wants, can do everything a man can do. But a man can never, no matter how hard he tries, accomplish what a woman's handicaps can perform. When a woman asserts that she wants to fulfill the duties of a man, she not only lessens her position, but she also pronounces a radical change in the nature's scheme of things. This is so, because if they start performing men's duties, then who will perform the duties of women? A man is not capable of performing these duties. Please remember, my daughter, that woman is responsible for the posterity and propagation of the human race. If she considers this ability to be demeaning and finds it difficult to fulfill her duties, then she would be interfering in nature's plans. The outcome is that, in spite of demanding her rights, she is depriving herself of the satisfaction that would come from fulfilling the duties prescribed by nature. As such, she has trapped herself in a psychological tussle. She cannot erase the biological difference of her physique, but by hating it and instead taking pride in man's physique, she has put herself into a self-made cauldron of discontentment. Tahira, firmly put in your mind, that by virtue of being a female, a woman qualifies herself for immense dignity and respect. But who would be more unfortunate than she, if she feels ashamed of being a woman? Her penchant for striving to be a man, robs her of mental self-enlightenment and the warmth of her humanness. There cannot be a worse predicament of her, and for that matter for humanity. Remember Tahira, home plays a foundation-laying role and the family has a pivotal position in the formation of the human race. A society that does not maintain the family, as it is happening in Europe in general and in Russia in particular, then its forthcoming generations are bound to be wayward and rudderless. Woman plays a central role in forming a home, hearth, and family. She has a major share in making a heavenly home and a dignified nation. If a woman tries to shoulder men's responsibilities by ignoring her own precious and important duties, then she is being unfair not only to herself but to her own society and to the whole of humanity. When I say this, I do not mean that women should not participate in what men are doing today. All I am saying is that she should fulfill her prime duties first, and when she is content that she has done this satisfactorily, then by all means she should participate in other aspects of life. European women. Copying Europe blindly is what makes things difficult for us. And the greater predicament is that we are copying at a time when Europe itself is trying to get rid of such aspects and their unwholesome consequences. In Europe women rebelled against men and started agitations for their rights. In fact, this was a reaction to Christian education that considers a woman's status to be the lower. Christian education states that woman was made from man's rib, and as such she is curved like a rib. It can never be straightened, and if you tried to do so, it would break. This education professed that all evil in the world is due to women, because Eve misguided Adam out of his heaven. That soul is meant for men only. And that women, like animals, do not have souls. A logical and incumbent consequence of this education was that women tried to be men. The first step towards this goal was to abandon their womanly duties. They thus started abrogating one by one, the factors that are essential for constituting a home. Gradually they reached a situation where there remained no difference between a home and a hotel. I do not mean that no cooking was done at home. What I mean is that a loving and genial relationship between a husband and a wife deteriorated, and what the Quran calls, the women are like a dress for the men and the men are like dress for the women. 2. 187. The relationship more or less became a business partnership. The children, in the first place, were considered as cumbersome intrusion. The children that were born were deprived of their mother's warm loving lap and their first learning ground. European psychologists have recently reached a conclusion after extensive research, that those children who have been separated from their mothers before they were 3, turned out to be criminals and wayward when they grew up. Therefore, Europe is gradually reverting to home life, after it learned a bitter lesson from its mistake. However, we seem to be starting the house desertion at the time when European women are turning back from their rebellion. There is another interesting phenomenon. The discussion starts with men's cruelty to women. That the men remarry, deserting the first wives, leaving them to starve, and ruining their children. The girls do not get their dowers when they get married, and no one is responsible for their caring and upkeep. This leads the women to demand that she should have a larger share of jobs, and that they should have so many reserved seats in the assembly. Parliament. Obviously, oppressed women are not in a position to get a job in an office or to become a member of the assembly. Those who are able to get jobs in the offices, or become members of the assembly, are usually not the oppressed and downtrodden ones. Member of assembly. Those who go to the assembly can never ameliorate the condition of the oppressed ones. As you know, I am not against women becoming the members of the assembly, but a woman who comes forward to safeguard the rights of her class, whether it is in the arena of leadership or in the House of Assembly, we should first check what she has done to set her own house right. How is her relationship with her husband? How much time does she spare for her children's nurturing, education and care? How much time has she given to the oppressed and poor class of women? Has she taken any practical steps to lighten their burden? Please listen again, we have to check as to what she has done practically. Our leaders and representatives do not go beyond making speeches, issuing statements and getting resolutions passed. I need not dwell upon these things in detail because, these are all the things which you used to say to Shahida. Then she used to brag about reforming the whole society. Rather humanity. Right? But her own house was in disarray. She used to formulate programs on how to care, nurture, and educate the whole future generations on correct lines. And she herself never even asked her children as to what they did or what they studied. She tells all the women of the world how to win their husbands' hearts, but she herself could not succeed with a husband like Saeed. In her essays, her heart bleeds for the condition of the wronged and oppressed women. But she is absolutely ignorant about the real lives of these downtrodden women and their living conditions. She reproaches others for not doing anything for their daughters and sisters who do not have enough to wear, while she orders silken brocade mattresses for her dogs and for herself. Tahira, you yourself used to reprimand Shahida for all these things. After all this, what do you think would be the outcome of Shahida for leading such a life? As for the welfare societies she used to form for the betterment of those women, what example can she set for them? Practical example. Remember, my dear daughter, the person capable of reforming a society is the one who can say with full confidence, to a gathering of not only his friends or admirers, but his adversaries, I have lived my whole life among you, can you not surmise whether my claims are truthful or false? 10. 16. The one who cannot make such a statement can neither have a successful life, nor revolutionize a society. Until the Shahida of our nation can look after her own house and herself, she cannot become the caretaker of humanity. 2. 143. Quran assigns this duty to the Muslim nation. This is the stable system of life. 30. 30. It is generally said, don't see who is saying it, but listen to what is being said. Meaning, if somebody advises you to do good, do not reject it by saying, physician, heal thyself. You should evaluate whether whatever is being said to you is good or not. If it is good, follow it; if not, then reject it. This maxim is true, but it only applies to the person who is being advised. It is also necessary that the advisor should adhere to the principles he is propounding, otherwise his expositions would not be effective. Actions always speak louder than the words. People, not conforming to their principles in their practical life, can never reform a nation. This is the main reason why our women's associations have not been effective. The women of these associations who want to reform others, lead lives that require much desired reforms themselves. If they can set their own homes in order and then come out to reform, then you will see how their efforts will bear fruit. But if they want to keep a house like Shahida's and then want to set their nation straight, then it is nothing more than deceiving others, besides themselves. Finally, I would like you to understand that if a woman has high ideals of collective life and believes she would be unable to fulfill her duties as a wife, then she should not marry. However, exception should be made for a person who is fully equipped to live this kind of life. But if she marries, then family duties should take the priority. Peace be with you. Parwez. 11th letter to Tahira. The importance of minor matters at home. My dear Tahira, you must be wondering about the fact that on the one hand, the Quran suffices with basic instructions on important matters of life, while on the other hand it gives specific guidance on minor matters in society. For instance, don't be caustic to people. Do not shout or yell. Do not be arrogant. Get permission before you enter somebody's house. How you should sit formally. If you have completed your work, do not waste other people's time in aimless talking, etc. etc. But my dear, perhaps you have not pondered over how important these little things in life are. Major problems are faced in life occasionally, and these are generally confronted by special people. But you come across these everyday happenings at every step in a society, and by everybody. Small happenings. The foundation of the fort of life, no doubt, is built upon those facts which the Quran describes as principles, but the rest of the building is constructed on it by these bricks which are known as the daily small happenings. Just imagine. No matter how much of a man of principle a person is, if he is impolite and caustic, then although the people who deal with him will learn from his principles, he will in fact cause them more distress than benefit by his impoliteness. People will shrink away from him and avoid meeting him. In fact, a person's character is depicted by these small gestures. Adhering to principles is like fuel in the car of life. It is true that a car moves with petrol in it, but you know how much Salim cares for the engine oil that goes with the petrol. He says the lack of petrol would at the most bring the car to a halt, but if the oil is not there, it would burn the engine. If following principles is like petrol, then the small details of life work like oil. If these are missing, they cause friction which can burn the delicate strands of a mutual relationship. Just consider whether these small details which the Quran describes for social life are of passing importance, or are they vital like permanent values. Is impoliteness and being caustic, which was shunned 1400 years ago, considered praiseworthy today? You will see that these things are just as important today as they were then. These social etiquette and manners have their own standing, and it is absolutely necessary to follow them and to preserve them. Social manners at home. These social manners and mores are important in every aspect of life, but their importance is greatly enhanced in home life. I see so many families, husband and wife, or other relatives, where there was nothing objectionable as a rule, but ignoring these niceties at home ruined their peace and contentment. Or at least it is no longer the same between a husband and wife, a life which the Quran calls a haven of love and peace. Just think of it, when a husband comes home with a smiling greeting and the wife greets him graciously, how depressions and frictions can get drowned. When one person's unintentional mistakes could be rebutted by only a real smile, it would certainly reward one with a heavenly home. Also, if one person flares up and the other remains soft-spoken, this would douse a fire. On the other hand, if a wife gets annoyed and goes to the other room poutingly, instead of discussing a conflicting problem seriously, it could create a deep rift between the two people. Also, not admitting one's shortcoming, and keeping on arguing to prove one's point, can rob a home of its peace. Here I am talking about impoliteness or sour behavior and the like, but I have observed that carelessness in small matters around the house creates a tense atmosphere at home. You must have seen your late aunt, but you did not have the opportunity to observe or study her home life. You were quite young when she died. About her, I can say with certainty, that she never ever committed a crime or sin throughout her whole life. Exemplary righteous woman. She was a rare example of honest and upright life, a personification of honesty and chastity. So soft-hearted was she that if a thorn pricked the foot of a servant, she would cry the whole night. She was such a contented woman that she never asked your uncle to buy her clothes or jewelry. Your uncle led a simple and modest life, despite his handsome income. By simple life, I mean that whatever was left over after fulfilling their general needs, was spent on constructive purposes for the welfare of humanity. He was posted to a high office. Everybody could see the affluent lifestyle of his contemporaries. They had cars, big bungalows, servants, chandeliers, glitter, jewelry, and expensive clothes. In short, they had everything that is considered essential for the household of officers. Your auntie could see all that and realized the comparatively simple life of her home, which may be referred to as poor. But she never cared and never complained, let alone even thought of what her standard of living was compared to theirs. The Jones. You will be surprised to know that the late lady did not know what your uncle's salary was, and neither did she ever feel the need to inquire. Ponder, Tahira. Could you find such a woman today? You also have your uncle whom you know better than I do. If she was unique among women, then he was a person of outstanding qualities among men. He has lofty qualities of head and heart, even in his old age. It is so obvious that if you do not find heavenly the family life of such a husband and wife, where else would you find heaven on this earth? But you will be surprised to know that in spite of all this, the outcome of such a companionship was not as pleasant as it should have been. But do not misunderstand. You can gauge the nature of their companionship from the fact that your aunt passed away when your uncle was still a middle-aged man. But after that, the idea of a second marriage did not even cross his mind. He has said to you many times, I did not marry again because I could not find another woman like your aunt. What I want to say is that having all those good qualities would have ensured a heavenly home, but it was not. The reason was that although the late lady had such high standards of principles, she was not careful enough about the small everyday happenings. She was not a terse or impolite woman. How could such a sensitive and sympathetic woman be like that? But she was not careful about the small niceties around the house. On the contrary, Uncle used to be very careful about the little details along with the lofty principles. Punctuality. For example, he believed in being on time. You must have noticed, punctuality was so important for him, and he was intensely particular about it. But your aunt, like it is usual for the woman in our society, was never bothered by punctuality. This is a small issue, but think how much friction they must have been having on this one point, throughout the day. By friction, I do not mean quarreling, I mean mental confrontations. Particularly, for a sensitive person like your uncle, this type of mental friction was worse than quarreling. We often noticed that whenever they had to go out somewhere, Uncle used to be ready and waiting outside the door, but Auntie took her time coming out from the house. Not a thing in its place. On inquiry you found out that she could not find one of the shoes of the pair. This was the second difference in their habits. Uncle believed in a neat lifestyle. You could get at this neatly kept things even in the darkness of night. You only had to reach for the thing you wanted, and you would find it even in the dark. In contrast, Auntie's predicament was that if she found the salt shaker, then she would not find the pepper shaker. If the motor was in front of her, then she could not find the pressing stone. Whenever you went to her house, the first thing you heard was, "I had it in my hand a minute ago, but can't remember where I put it." This was the third point of incompatibility in their habits. Uncle's memory is so sharp, till today, that he can tell you where a stone or electric post used to be 30 years ago. Absent-minded. Auntie's forgetfulness was such that one evening I saw the girdle on the stove and she looked worried. When asked, she told that she had forgotten to knead the flour. She realized this only when she put the girdle on the stove. On the other hand, Uncle's habit was such that if he would not get his meal on time, then he would not eat. Mismanagement. We had seen that when heading towards the bathroom from his room. On the way he would straighten a bed, or move a chair to its proper position, or arrange a curtain properly, or pick up a child's misplaced book and put it in the satchel. But when he reached the bathroom, he would notice that soap was missing, but the towel was there. If his shirt was there then his vest was not. He used to protest loudly over this. He knew how heavily the scales of untidiness tilted towards his wife's good traits. These drawbacks of her were due to wrong upbringing. He felt quite unnerved by it, as you can guess. But do not measure your aunt as raw material in household affairs or management. Absolutely not. The only thing was that she was not as careful as your uncle about small niceties around the house. It would not have mattered if your uncle, too, was like that. However, since his disposition was different, he used to suffer. If only Auntie would have tried a little, it would not have been difficult to overcome her shortcomings. She should have done so. Now, your friends, if not you, would surely remark, "See, Mr. Parwez is after all a man, so he has sided with men. He says, Auntie should have changed and made her habits congruent with Uncle's. Why does he not say that Uncle should have tried to walk along Auntie's traits?" But dear, if you look carefully, you will discern the fact that I am not for or against anybody. It is obvious that Aunt's carelessness was not a good habit. On the contrary, Uncle's lifestyle was commendable. That is the reason why I have said that Auntie should have changed her habits to eliminate the friction. If Uncle would have been the careless one, and Auntie careful, then I would have suggested the same thing for Uncle. If you ask, what if both had been careless? Then either they would have corrected their habits with mutual consent, or if that was not possible, then they would have gone along with each other without friction. Compatibility. But how this kind of careless home affects children is quite obvious. It is absolutely necessary for a husband and wife to be compatible, first of all in principles, then in matters of habits and directions. Do you know why Quran forbids the marriage of a believer mu'min to a non-believing mushrik woman or vice versa? 221. Faith and disbelief are two antagonistic principles that take you to two different tracks of life. I have told you this many times before. Quran wants to highlight this fact that men and women of antagonistic beliefs can never have a harmonious married life. If two such people do get married, then they would have a life of hell. Quran says, people who want to perpetuate such a relationship do beckon you to the fire. But God beckons you, as per this commandment, to a life that promises to be heavenly and protects you from destruction. 221. Have you pondered, Tahira, why Allah considers the incompatibilities in matrimonial relationships as hell? These verses bring forth principal differences in faith, which are widely opposite ways of life. The Quran goes as deep as to say, women impure are for men impure and women impure for men impure. In contrast to it, and women of purity are for men of purity and men of purity are for women of purity. 24. 26. Impure and pure are very concise terms of Quran. They encompass the purity and impurity of mind and heart, piety and sordidness of habits, and of a character being pleasant or unpleasant. Quran discerns the compatibility of beliefs and practices as a basic condition for a husband and wife. It ties a hellish man with a hellish woman, and a heavenly man is strung together with a heavenly woman. Therefore, it is incumbent for making your married life heavenly, that a wife should instill all the good habits of her husband, and a husband should make himself congruent with all the pleasant traits of his wife. In this context, everyday niceties need to be especially pampered. Leave alone our headstrong men whose brains are ridden with the faulty notions that men are in every way superior to women and have an upper hand over them, and that therefore it would be an insult to condone their wives' good traits. But our women, too, are too lazy to bring a change in themselves. Whenever, or if ever the husband encourages them to change, they retort by saying that they have been molded that way and that they would remain the same, whether they are good or bad. You can find the woman you desire from the West, so bring them from there. Just think, my daughter, what a negative mentality this is, and how destructive this kind of foolishness could be. If a husband and wife's relationship is like a body and apparel, then they have to fit to each other. The apparel should fit the body. The Quran says, "They are your garments and you are their garments." 2. 187. Now do you understand why the Quran emphasizes the everyday niceties, and how important they are for home life? God be with you. My blessings for young Javed. Please listen, by no means should your uncle see this letter. He just cannot stand anything said against your late aunt. That respected lady had such a high character, and what a husband he was with such a purity of thought. Where one would find such people now? Parwez, July 1956. Talyu Islam Trust. 25B, Gulberg 2. Lahore, Pakistan. taluiislam@gmail.com